All right. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks for welcoming me here today, especially I know that you guys have spring break coming up, so those of you who came here must be really committed to InterVarsity and to Jesus. Saying nothing about the other people that aren't here. But just a little intro to myself beyond, I don't know.
Dennis, I'm sorry.
Beyond what Dennis told you. So I'm a graduate of UCLA. I was a part of InterVarsity there. I was part of it for 4 years, and that's actually where I met Tim, one of your fearless leaders. It's also where I met my husband, Jared, whom some of you will meet. Is anyone here a senior or will be? Well, if you're going to SpringCon this weekend, or this week, he'll be there as well. So tall, skating right guy. So I loved InterVarsity. I loved my time in college. It's where I really, learned what it meant to actually follow Jesus. And afterwards, I spent 2 years on intern staff at UCLA with InterVarsity, as Dennis said. And then I went on to work for a nonprofit consulting firm where I worked for about 15 to 20 domestic to international nonprofits. And then I went on to work for Harvest Home, which is a transitional shelter for homeless pregnant women. And I'm wrapping up about 4 years of work there this summer. And then I'm moving on, and I'm going back to school actually to get my MPA in nonprofit management with a specialization in international development. My goal long term is to be a director of an NGO overseas, and that's really kind of where my career path is heading towards. I'm really glad that Tim invited me to speak today, not just because I love Jesus, not just because I love my career, which I do, both of those things, but it's because I'm excited to be back here because it was in InterVarsity that God actually started to help me discern my calling. It's where I learned more about myself, more about how to follow Jesus and what it might look like to do that for the rest of my life. So I believe that Jesus has something to offer each of you here tonight. And, whether you already know exactly, what your major is and what your career path is, and you're about to graduate and you're set and you're ready, or whether you're just starting to think about it and you're feeling really anxious and like, I have no idea what I'm going to do. Are you kidding me? No matter where you're at on that spectrum, I think Jesus has something for you. So as we begin, I'm just going to pray. Is that all right? Yeah. God, I thank you for this time. Thank you for this group of students, Lord. Thank you that you are our God and our Father, our Creator. And Lord, I pray tonight that your Holy Spirit would come, that you would speak through me, Lord, and help me to, really just be a vessel for your word, Lord. With anything out of my own flesh, just kind of fall away, Lord, and where would your word to each and every one of the students here really be what stays. God, I confess that I don't have it all together. I don't know all the answers. I myself am a sinful and broken person, and I thank you, Lord, that, that's the kind of God you are, that you still call people such as me, people such as us, to do your will. So, Lord, we pray that you would, have mercy upon us this evening and just be present here. We pray these things in your Son's name. Amen. Okay, so today we're talking about career and calling. It's a really pertinent topic because you guys are in college and you need to figure out what your major is and what your career path is and what you're going to do for a living afterwards. It's also significant given our just where we are, in California, in America, in Western society. Jobs are really important. They're not just how we have economic livelihood, but it's also I'm not saying this is a good thing, but it's kind of like how we're defined, right? Pretty much since I graduated from college, every single function, event, anywhere I go, if I'm meeting someone for the first time, it's at least the first or second question I get asked, like, what do you do? What do you do? And sometimes I just want to be like, I don't know, I watch Netflix a lot. I like to sing along to the radio. That's not what people want to know. They're not like, oh, what is your deepest joy or anything? No, they want to know how can we label you? How do we, be able to place you in our society as far as what function you play? It's kind of annoying, but as such, it is something that's important in our society. It's something that's valued, and I'm imagining it's something that's on each of your minds. You can even see what little kids, right? How many of you, when you were little, were asked what am I going to be when I grow up? Anyone? Let's go back there. Turn to your neighbor. All right, time travel back to 7 to 10 years old. If someone would have asked you, what do you want to be when you grow up? What would you have said? Share with me.
Oh, yeah, cool.
All right, what are some of the best ones? Shout them out. What did you want to be what did you want to be when you grew up? Want to shout it out? Hockey player, archaeologist,
Pro wrestler.
pro wrestler. What? What is that even? An astrogeologist. Forward thinker. Anyone else? Well, that was like 15 out of 10. Artist? Anything else? Veterinarian? Disney Channel star. Right? There's still time, man. There's still time. Anyone else got a good one? Olympic ice skater. A race car driver? Ooh, like on the edge. Okay. Yeah, when I was little, I think I have you all beat. When I was little, I wanted to be a ballerina, artist, piano player, doctor. Like, all in one. Because that seemed like a really fair career to me. Like, you should just be able to do all these. Never mind that I didn't actually know how to play the piano or do ballet. And I probably wasn't that great of an artist either. Nor did I know how to study medicine. But all of those things, I just really wanted to be that. And it was such an easy question to answer when you were a kid, right? Because it's just like, oh, what do I like? What do I see on TV? Who wears a cool uniform? That's like what I want to be when I grow up. So, this is Precious. Isn't she, though? Precious is a friend of mine. She lives in Ghana, in Kumasi, Ghana, and I was there this past summer. And she's a part of a school. There's an organization here called the Adult Partnership, and we actually raise funds for scholarships for some of the students over there. So I was there this past summer, and we were kind of revamping our scholarship program. We were interviewing a lot of the kids that still needed scholarships. And so we just asked like basic questions like, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite subject? And one of the questions was like, what does your dad do for a living? And Precious was like, oh, he's an onion trader, which means he sells onions in the market. Like, okay, next question, like, what does your mom do for a living? She's an onion trader. She sells onions in the market. And then we asked her, like, Precious, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she's like, an onion trader. Like, it was like, she thought it was like the dumbest question that we were asking. Like, why do you keep asking me this question? We are onion traders. So that's Precious. She's 6 years old. And it was so easy to her, too, right? And for a different reason. It's not that easy anymore to answer that question, right? What do you want to do? I was talking to Ben's here, and I was asking what he wanted to do when he was little. What did he want to be when he grew up? And he told me an archaeologist. He's like, but now, and then it's a little more complicated, right? And then he feels the need to like disclaimer and be like, oh, well, I strayed away from my childhood dream because X, Y, or Z. And yeah, I just feel like there was even like a weightiness to the way that you answered that question. I think so. That's how it is sometimes because. Like we have this anxiety, there's so many things to consider. How do we know if we're actually like making the right choice? The right choice, right? How many of you guys feel that? Like maybe there's a little bit of anxiety. How about a little bit of fear when you think about it? How about some of you like, well, if I thought about it, but I don't want to. I was a little bit like that. I think when we're considering our career, there's so many factors swirling in our heads. There's like success, right? Like, is this job going to give me like prestige and advancement in my career? There's like compensation, like how much will it pay? Like, not like I'm trying to be like rich, not like I'm trying to be greedy, God, but like, I gotta live. And then there's like meaning and impact, right? That's something that's pretty like common for our generation especially, but also for, in the Christian churches, like we want to do something that actually has some sort of impact on the world. There are so many needs, what's my place in that? There's also like passions, right? Like some things I just like better than others, and there's some causes I'm passionate about, and there's some hobbies I'm passionate about. And then there's stability, right? Like stability is a big thing in my family. I'm second generation Vietnamese American, and that was like the biggest thing. Like it was always like you have to be a doctor, or if you weren't smart enough, you could be like an engineer. And then if like you couldn't be an engineer, then like you could be a pharmacist because there's always job stability. Like that's the thing with. For some reason, my family has in their head that pharmacists have like the best job stability of any other career on the planet. That may be true, I don't know. I haven't done the research. But then there's also family expectations, right? So some of that comes into play. So my grandmother, who always wanted me to be a doctor, like from the age of, 7, right? Doctor was in my top 4. I guarantee you that didn't come from like my 7-year-old brain that I wanted to be a doctor. From like age 7 until like 2 years ago. My grandmother, every time I called her on the phone, she'd be like, are you sure you're doing what you want to do? Don't you want to be a doctor? And as I would like, kind of go and doing things, because my grandmother's a strong like Catholic woman too, so she's, I'd be like, God, like when I was doing the internship, I was like, Grandma, I'm like serving God. I'm like, doing ministry. Aren't you proud of that? And she's like, I see that you want to help people. The best way to help people? to be a doctor. And, it's still, I'm like 28, almost 29 years old right now, and like, when I got into grad school, I like almost didn't want to call my grandma because I was afraid she was going to be like, "You sure you want to be a doctor?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure." There's also our skills and giftings that come into play, right? What are we actually good at? If I had actually gone down that road, I would have been like, "I'm not very good at science. This is a really bad idea for me to go down this path of becoming a doctor." And at the end of the day, there's also satisfaction. We're spending 8 to 10, some people spend 12 hours a day doing their job. It should be something you enjoy, right? It should be something that you're, come back home and lay your head on your pillow and be like, "I'm glad I'm doing this. I feel good doing this." All of these things swirling through our heads. And when we're making this decision, it's like, how could we possibly find like one job that is like the perfect combination ratio of all of these things combined? It's a little bit stressful, and when you think about it that way, choosing a career could feel like it's one of the biggest riddles like you're trying to solve in your life. Does it feel that way at all? If not, like, I hope I did not just scare you. The thing is, I don't think it's necessarily supposed to be this way, but that's just the reality. That is what it is. We'll bring that to God and be like, "This is where we're at, God. Come and try to meet us in that." But as I was preparing for this talk and I was thinking about it a little bit more, I realized like this is not how the majority of the world thinks about like employment or like what they're doing for a living, right? Like the majority world, the developing world, most people are, or even like people in this country, like for immigrants and single mothers in this country, a job is just what you do in exchange for like economic livelihood, right? And sometimes there's like no decision made whatsoever, like Precious, right? Like my parents sell onions and that's how, we kind of survive. So I will sell onions. Like why would I do anything different? And I think that's true. I work with single mothers here in LA, and that's a similar thing. It's like, the fact that they're pregnant and about to have a baby, the fact that they have a certain education level, the fact that they need to actually support their family, there are only so many options available to them. Does that mean that like this, thing, this big question that we're considering is not important? No. I think that, like any other, it's a privilege that we have to be able to choose this because, of our education, the fact that even by the time you graduate here, you will have had a 4-year degree, that puts you at the top 1% of the world as far as, economic opportunity because you're able to translate your education and your resources into something that will, benefit you. But just like any other privilege we have, whether that be, our education, our ethnic identity, our finances, our placement in life, it's something that we do have to consider seriously. It's something that we need to learn how to steward well and how to actually engage with God on that and how to actually invite Him into that process and to be in prayer and wisdom. Does that make sense? The tricky thing, though, is when we bring this to God, it's like, well, the Bible actually doesn't say that much about, like, career specifically. It does a little bit like when Jesus calls, Peter, James, and John, they were fishermen, and it says, like, oh, and now you're going to be fishers of men. And that's like, okay, well, that's like a career change for him. You can kind of see that. You can see that for Paul, right? Or when he was Saul, he was like, his job was like persecuting Christians. It was more than that. But, like, of what we see in the Bible, his job was like persecuting Christians. And then after that, his job was like making Christians. But then there's even this passage about tent making, right? About how to sustain his ministry, he had to like make tents, and that was his job. Like then there's some kings in there, and there's some people that do different things, but there's not a lot of talk about like archaeologists or sociologists or doctors or engineers or anything like that. But I still think there's something that God has for us in the Scripture to say about career, and that is actually a bigger concept. This concept of calling. The Holy Scriptures talk a lot about calling, about how the people of God should live, how they are chosen children of God, how followers of Jesus should be living out the kingdom in community with one another, and how followers of Jesus should bear witness to the grace and truth of Jesus Christ. That's kind of our like big picture, capital C calling. And I think career kind of falls into that, right? There's this kind of calling now is, I think, a more modern word in the traditional church, vocation was kind of that term, and that comes out of this like, okay, everyone is called to make disciples of all nations. Everyone is called to love God and love their neighbor. But a vocation is like, well, what does that specifically look like for you? That's how we're going to talk about calling today. Like, what does it look like for you specifically to live out the kingdom, to spread Jesus' love, to be his hands and feet in this world. Does that make sense? So we're going to talk about calling for a little bit. Okay. Yeah. So this is a quote. I can never. Does someone know how to pronounce his name? Frederick
Buckner?
Buckner. Okay. Sure. So Frederick Buckner says, "The place God calls you is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. The place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." Gordon Smith is another author. He says, "Our unique calling will be based in our gifts and abilities. It will grow out of our deepest desires and will always involve some response to the needs of the world." So what's kind of common between these things? One, there's a you component, right? There's something about you and how you are uniquely created by God, your passions, your desires, your interests. And on the other side of it, it's the world, right? So it's almost like a puzzle piece of like, how are you uniquely created? What is the shape and what is the like puzzle-shaped hole need in the world that you're going to fill? And I think that when we consider calling in that regard, career is just kind of one small component of that. It's an important component because, again, that's what you're going to spend most of your day doing. But it's only one component of that. Other things come into play as well, like where you're going to live, who you date, who you're going to marry, what church you're part of, where you're in community. All of these things actually come into play as far as like what your calling looks like. Now, to see this kind of illustrated, I want to tell you guys a story. It's a story of a woman named Catherine Kagina. She is, let's take a sip of water. So she's a Ugandan woman, and throughout most of the 1990s, she worked for the Ugandan Revenue Authority. So that's kind of our equivalent of the IRS. So they're just the tax authority that collected taxes from the people and then funneled out to the government, and the government in turn turned out services for the public. The Ugandan Revenue Authority throughout the late 90s, early 2000s was considered the most corrupt institution in Uganda. And it was so corrupt that Uganda as a country was consistently ranked low as far as being a borrowing country. So there would be, kind of these international world organizations would be like, don't lend money to Uganda because they're just going to like cheat their people out of it and it's not actually going to turn out any services. So it's not worth lending money to them. So Catherine Kagina was a Christian woman. She worked as a revenue officer, so just someone that kind of processed the taxes. And she hated the fact that she worked for the most unjust agency in Uganda. But she had no idea what there was to be done about it. So what she did is that she started to pray. And as she started to pray, she started to ask God, I need other people in this. It feels too big for me to pray for it. I need other people to partner with me in prayer. So she found like-minded employees that also felt like, no, we want God to move in this place. So they prayed. They prayed for years. They prayed that God would take control of the Ugandan Revenue Authority, the URA. And they prayed big prayers. Not just that God would kind of root out the injustice, but that bigger things like Uganda would one day be a place, a financial place where people could where Uganda would actually lend money to other countries instead of being a borrower country. Does that make sense? So they prayed for years and years and years. And finally, the opportunity came in 2004 where Catherine actually rose to leadership. She actually was given this opportunity to lead the entire organization. That's not necessarily what she was like trained to do. She wasn't trained in management. She wasn't trained in organizational leadership at the time. She was trained to be, she was actually a psychology major and she was trained to be an accountant essentially. But she was given the lead. She had prayed for a long time and God basically said, okay, here, it's your turn to do something with it. And so what she did was something actually pretty revolutionary. So there are 2,000 core employees. She basically told all of them, you have to reapply for your jobs. So it's almost like you're all fired, essentially, but you can reapply for your job. And so everyone was kind of placed on administrative leave, and everyone had to go through the application process again. And she and her team put very stringent requirements in place, like ethical requirements and relational requirements and standards of excellence for how people were doing their job. She did a couple other things in her term as leadership. She did a wide survey. She would have teams from the URA kind of go out to the community and survey Ugandan citizens like, okay, how do you actually feel about the URA? what could we actually do that would be helpful to you? We're listening. We want to hear you. And there would be, answers to the questions like, well, you're only open like during the day when we're at work. So how are we supposed to come and actually file our taxes? How do we do that? So small things like that. But she actually went into the community and started to rebrand the agency and change policies to better serve the citizens. In her 10 years of leadership, the URA went from not bringing in any profits, like literally like a negative profit agency, to being one of the most profitable institutions in the entire country, and profitable for the nation, right? So so before, when the URA was collecting taxes, people just wouldn't pay their taxes, because why would you pay your taxes to a corrupt organization? But as she turned it around, people were actually paying their taxes, and the government was actually able to funnel that back into services for the community. So it had gone from being the most corrupt institution to being one of the most trusted institutions, and other agencies in Uganda were actually coming to her and saying, how did you do that? Like, teach us how to lead, teach us how to turn our organizations around. And since then, Al and Catherine has been kind of a model in the international community, as actually like to consult other nations, especially African nations, on how to kind of do an economic turnaround in their country. That's like a huge thing, right? That she was brought into, that kind of just started from her praying at her desk that something would change. I guarantee you that's not anything she could have imagined when she was 20 years old studying in the university that God would use her to do. But that's what God's plan for her life was, to have an impact that was huge and to actually have her meet a need that was kind of like Al and Catherine shaped, right? Not that she knew that before, but that's what God is inviting her into. God had a plan for her life that was so much bigger than, you're just going to be a tax revenue employee. God has a plan for you too. It may look like being a doctor, it may look like being an engineer or a sociologist or an archaeologist or a film major, whatever that looks like. And that is part of his plan. But it's also so much more than that. You can have a story that is as significant and as great as Al and Catherine's. And 20 years from now, you'll be looking back and saying, man, I had no idea when I was sitting in that room in humanities that God was going to do this with my life. As we follow Jesus and learn what it looks like to be in a relationship with him, to live in his kingdom, to give yourself to others, he will also, season by season, kind of show you your calling as well and what that looks like. And the end goal is for you to live the life that you were created for, to be in relationship with your Father, but also to really deeply meet the needs of this world. So when we consider our career, it is important to consider our wider calling. Yes, it may be that, God is calling me into this major or this job for right now, but as a whole, what is he doing? What is he doing in my life? What is he teaching me about myself? So the first point I want to make just about, calling in general as we consider this point is that living into your calling means surrendering all aspects of your life to God. This is something I mentioned before, I think sometimes we think that, like, especially in this stage in your life, right, it's like, okay, yeah, job, that's like the most important thing for me to figure out, and if I don't figure that out, I'm going to perish or move back in with my parents, which may feel like the same thing. So it is important. I think, for each season there are more some questions that have more significance and weight than others, and it totally makes sense that that's what you're thinking about right now. But I want to encourage you, everything else matters as well, right? If you choose a job that may be in line with what God has for you, but you're not living in community and your spiritual life kind of fades away, then you're not living into your calling. If you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, but then you end up kind of tethering yourself to someone, maybe in a relationship that ends up being kind of emotionally and mentally destructive for you, you're not going to be living out your fullness even in your career, right? Who are you surrounding yourself with? Are you with people that are actually calling out your gifts and encouraging you and supporting you? That matters. So I would just encourage you, you should consider all of these decisions with equal weight as we do our career. And again, that doesn't mean that you don't put significance on your career, but it means actually kind of look at all these other things too, because they all factor into kind of who you are and the life that you're going to live and the things that affect you day to day. Second point I want to make is there is no right or wrong career. Getting back to that anxiety that we feel, I think sometimes it's like, I need to make the right choice. What's the right choice? If I make the wrong choice, what's going to happen? But I think aside from doing something that is like contrary to biblical teaching. Like, as long as your job's not to, like, kill someone, or, I mean, clearly not. But even smaller things of, like, you know, a job that kind of leads you into, like, deceiving people or cheating people, or something that just feels like, you know, maybe it's kind of tied to some systematic injustices that I don't feel right about. Those are things to kind of be aware of, to make sure that your job is kind of in line with biblical teaching in that regard. But outside of that, I don't think, you know, between, like, studying film or studying music, because really, like, both of them, I don't think necessarily one is right or one is wrong, right? It's not like God's going to be like, you chose the wrong one. You're doomed to not be successful. That's not how it works. But it feels like this. So a funny story. So my husband, Jared, we were friends in college. We were in Intervarsity together. And our senior year, we were kind of like discerning our future. And we were not together. We weren't dating. Yeah, we were just friends. And we were like discerning our futures. And we were both like considering similar things, right? It was like internship, like university internship, going in servant partner staff, which is like inner city ministry, or like going overseas, because we both had this like passion to go overseas. And I remember like the day he told me that he was choosing to go to Ghana. In my mind, I was like, that is the wrong decision. I was kind of a controlling person, because I was like nowhere near my business to like say on his life. But in my mind, I'm like, that's the wrong decision. So I remember going to my mentor, Jerome, if any of you know him, he was my mentor at the time, and I was like, Jerome, Jared is making the wrong decision. He's going to go to Ghana. And that's clearly not the right thing for him, because you know that what God is like teaching him in this season of his life is like to be more interdependent in community. And if he goes to Ghana by himself, that's going to be like, you know, the depth of his spiritual life, and that's just going to like, you know, reinforce these like besetting sins that are not helpful for like. I was crazy, by the way. Like, this is what I was, you know, like, I was like, you should tell Sam, his supervisor, if he's making the wrong decision, you should tell him to stop him, because that's like not what he should be doing. And Jerome put up with a lot of my nonsense. But he kind of looked at me, he's like, just like, Jared's gonna be okay. Like, maybe, you know, if I were to like counsel him between one of the two, like maybe I would say another decision is wiser than the other, but like, Jared's still following Jesus, and, you know, he's not going to go anywhere outside of, you know, God's reach for him, right? Like, maybe this will be challenging for him, or he's stepping into something that's going to be, you know, more challenging for his life in this way. But, like, God's grace is big enough to cover that. Do you believe that? I was like, I guess. But I think, like, in that moment, he was even kind of saying, like, do you believe that for yourself as well, right? Like, there's no right or wrong decision. It's okay. God's giving you some clues, teaching you some things about yourself, and giving you opportunities to step into, and that's an exciting thing. It's not necessarily going to be a right or wrong. Similarly, I think, you know, something we need to understand is that there's no crew that's like more holy or faithful than another. You know how we think that sometimes like Ben and Tim must be really holy because they're like, you know, like they fundraise for a living and they're like ministering the gospel every day, right? Which they are, but not any more holy than like anything any of you are going to be doing, right? I think that's like a lie that even Christians, I think especially Christians, we perpetuate. But the reality is some people are called to be missionaries and pastors, and other people are called to be overseas and university staff, but like the majority of people are not. The majority of people are like day in and day out, like living like what the world would see as like normal 9-to-5 jobs. And that's okay. And that's perfectly all right, because the reality is like I would probably make a bad missionary in some regards, right? Like that's not where my giftings lie. I don't know if that's, you know, necessarily, I mean, actually I do know, because I did the internship with Intervarsity trying to discern that, and I was like, no, I can't do full-time staff. Like that's just not how I'm built, and that's okay. I wasn't letting God down. I wasn't, you know, saying, you know, like no to Jesus and yes to like the pleasures of the world or anything. No, it's just like that wasn't, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like that was kind of what I was kind of made to do. So I think that's something to kind of hold in your mind. There's no right or wrong. There's no thing that's like holy or more faithful than others. Like it's likely that the thing that you're considering right now is perfectly acceptable to God. And he would be excited to see you kind of explore that and see what that looks like in some way, shape, or form. And then, you know, maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, you might refine your interest a little bit. You may figure out like, oh, I mean, I tried that for a little bit, and there's some aspects I liked about it, but I don't know. Maybe I want to try going into this. That's the beauty of God, right? He gives us a lot of freedom. He gives us a lot of, he's a creative God. He's a playful God. And I think, you know, he gives us a lot of room to work within that and kind of discover ourselves. And that's a process that he actually really appreciates partnering with us. in that. Okay. The third point I want to make is that your calling is both for you and for the world. So before, when we kind of define this thing as calling of like this like hole in the world that your puzzle piece fits, it's not just that your sole purpose in life is to like serve and be this cog in the machine and like fix the problems of the world because that's what we decide to do. That's not what the reality is. The reality is that Jesus says that as you lose your life, you find life. Those who lose life find life. Jesus says that as we kind of leave our fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, lands, that we actually gain that and more in this lifetime and in the lifetime to come. The reality is as you follow Jesus, season by season, he will show you more and more of who you are and what your place in the world is. And the reality is you come alive when you're in the place that God wants you to be. You come alive in that place. And that's something that I've experienced in my own life too. That's kind of how I know, what works and what doesn't work, because some jobs have just felt kind of soul crushing. And it feels like, Jesus, I don't know where you are at the end of this day because I feel like I'm, just a robot. I hate this. And that's a clue to me that like, maybe this isn't where you're supposed to be. And so that's what I found. Every step, every season in my life, as I've moved from one thing to the next, I come into a deeper understanding of who I am, and God gives me opportunities to kind of live out my desires and my passions in that way. And in so doing, I am serving people. I am kind of, laying down life, but I'm also gaining a lot of life. There's a deeper joy. There's a deeper peace, a satisfaction. There's a greater love of myself that I have than I did before, and a greater peace as you partner with God in your calling. Does that make sense? So what does this actually look like? Because now you guys are still asking me like, okay, well, that's all well and good, but that's what calling is. But like, how do we figure it out? Like, what does it look like to figure that out? So the first step, the first application point is to know God. As I was praying for this talk and praying for you guys, the verse in John 15 came up. Well, the whole scripture of John 15. That's the one where Jesus goes, I am the vine and you are the branches, abide in me. And I think what's significant about that is that it's kind of this paradox of as you are in deeper relationship with God and focused on God, he kind of points it back to yourself and you learn more about yourself as well. And I think that's because as you get closer to your creator, you kind of learn more about his creation. And that's you, right? Another thing is, in John 10 it says, it talks about Jesus as a shepherd and how he uses imagery of the shepherd and the sheep. And it says, the sheep follow the shepherd because they know his voice. The sheep follow the shepherd because they know his voice. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. The more you are in relationship with God, it sounds like of course you'd be in relationship with God, but no, really, like, truly, like the more you're in day-to-day like prayer and worship and just even quiet time and contemplation, meditation with God, the more you'll just kind of recognize what his voice sounds like. And sometimes it's an audible voice, and a lot of times it's like, oh, I feel like he's kind of present in this decision, and I feel like he's not in that other decision. It's kind of, different for each person and what that's like, but all I, know of my experience and experience of, my friends around me is just the more we spend time with God, the more we know what his voice sounds like in our life, and the more we can actually drown out the voices that aren't his. And so when you come to a decision in your life where you're like, okay, which way should I go? Which one should I pick? Sometimes God will be very clear and say, like, you should do this one. But other times it's a little more gentler, and he will give you a voice of like, well, have you considered this? Or, how about this? And there's like just very specific words or scriptures that he'll bring up. And that's kind of how you discern and make decisions. So know God, know his voice. Oh, sorry, I went back. I forgot I didn't these things. So the second thing is know yourself. So again, your career and calling will be informed by who you are. What are your passions? What are your interests? What's your unique background? What are your giftings? What is your potential? What do you see in yourself? You're like, oh, I think I could actually be a really good X because of, this is what I see in my life so far. This is the time in your life, your 20s, and starting now in college and throughout the next decade of when God's really saying, like, explore, learn things about yourself. Again, he's a God that gives a lot of freedom in that. So for me, going at intern staff was helpful because I learned that, I had some ministry giftings that I really enjoyed. I liked preaching, I liked worship leading, I liked teaching the Bible, and there were a lot of things I enjoyed about it. But at the end of the day, it was very much like, okay, I like you guys, but my heart wasn't for college students. Like that just wasn't the reality, right? I like the students that I worked with. It's not like I was like, oh, you guys are jerks, and I don't want to work with you. But it was like, but this isn't like I'm sitting here doing college ministry, and then I'll read the news at night and start crying about kids in North Korea or something. And it's like, it seems really stupid, But then I was like, no, God's showing something in me. There are passions in my heart that I think I need to actually explore that are outside of the realm of InterVarsity at this point. And then I worked for a nonprofit consulting agency, and I learned a lot about nonprofits. I actually learned that I loved working for nonprofits, and I learned that I didn't like consulting. I learned that I can't work at too big of a level because I need to actually work for an organization and have the impact that I do. Then I work right now for a domestic organization that works with women, and there's a lot of things I love about that. I love working with women. I love working for the organization. I love the role that I have because I'm the director of programs, and I get to make strategic decisions, and I get to manage the team, but be close enough to be in contact with the clients we serve. So I learned that, and then I realized my heart still kind of itches for international things. So now I'm going back to school. Right? So you can see it's step by step by step. I'm kind of learning more about myself, and that looks different for different people. I'm not saying you have to go into the career path that I do, but what is that for you? What leadership positions or events have you planned, or volunteer opportunities, or even hobbies? I have a friend who is a really great software designer, and how I know he is? Because he'll just be sitting around and playing Scrabble, and he's like, I should probably design a program to optimize my playing in Scrabble or something like that. He thinks like that all the time. And in fact, that's what he thinks about all the time. It's very clear, you were designed to do this. So pay attention to those things. What do you enjoy doing? What gives you joy? What are you good at? What sort of projects or activities, are you in where you feel like you're in the zone, you feel alive when you do this? And on the other side of the coin, what are subjects you just hate, right? If you don't like economics or numbers, you probably shouldn't be in business. That just doesn't make any sense, right? If you don't like science, then you probably shouldn't be a doctor. I used that example earlier. But that's okay. It's totally okay to not like something. Even if it's ministry, right? It's yeah, I just don't really like doing that. Now, God still will call you out of your comfort zone sometimes, and there will be times where God's calling you to do things that you don't like. I don't want to make it seem it's just do whatever you want. But in a sense, eventually, whatever your career is, it's going to be what you want to do. I promise you that. God is not going to drag you kicking and screaming down some career path that feels like it's soul crushing to you. Your parents may do that, but that's not who God is. Okay. If you love your parents, they're not like that. I'm not talking to you. So similarly, what work environments feel stifling or crushing? This is where the introvert extrovert things come in, or I love working in a group, or I hate it. All these things come into play. So I think the thing is, know yourself. Be attentive. Each season of your life that you're in, whether it's kind of one step to the next, or whether it's maybe I should reevaluate and kind of go in a different path, God is teaching you something about yourself. And it's your job to kind of be attentive, because while there isn't a right or wrong per se sometimes, there is a better choice you can make. More informed based on what you're learning about yourself. Does that make sense? Okay. I would say another part of knowing yourself is kind of being in community. It's a great place to actually do that because you can give each other feedback. You can say things like I said, why are you majoring in business? You seem to hate economics. Or it seemed you really like organizing that event. What is it, soccer on Fridays? Maybe you should try organizing some more events because it seems like you're really good at that. I had people doing that to me all the time in college. It was so helpful. I remember the first time someone told me, actually Jerome told me I organized something for the first time, and he's like, oh, you really have a ruling gifting. I was like, what's a ruling gifting? That sounds awesome. And he's like, oh, it's you like directing people, and you can see a vision, and you can kind of organize people onto that end. I was like, oh, dude, that's awesome. All growing up, people just told me I was bossy, and I thought it was the worst thing. But now I have a ruling gifting. There's still to learn how to live into the fullness of that and kind of strip away the sinful parts of that. But that was the great thing about being in college, because I think sometimes it's hard for us ourselves just to really accurately evaluate ourselves. There's a lot going into that, right? There might be insecurities, there might be overinflated egos, there might be us trying to fit ourselves into a mold of the kind of person that we want to be, But I think our friends, our community, if they're good friends and good community, they can be honest with you, right? And give you honest feedback about that. So take advantage of this time that you have with one another. If you're in this fellowship and you feel like you don't necessarily have those relationships, start to build them. I think as much as this can be a safe place and a safe community for you guys to be helping each other discover yourselves, I think it'll be that much more fruitful for you after you leave here. The third thing I'll say is, so there's know God, know yourself, and the third thing is get wisdom. Like I said, much as we would wish it sometimes, God doesn't always give us a voice from the clouds, clear, loud, you should be a rock star. Sometimes he does. And in those times, it is his grace and it's awesome. I've had moments of that in my life, and I have had moments where it's cricket, and I need to figure out okay, it's not like God wants me to do nothing, but how do I move forward in this moment? And I think there's a staff of Intervarsity staff called John Ball, and he uses this image of God loves us more than that. Sometimes it's why can't you just tell me what you want me to do? Seriously, I will be faithful, I will obey. Just tell me exactly what you want me to do. And the image John Ball uses is that he's a parent of a teenager, and he says, as a parent of a teenager, imagine if every morning I gave my 16-year-old a schedule with instructions of every 15 minutes of the day, this is what she's supposed to do. That's not how parents should parent teenagers, right? That's not loving. That's not giving them freedom. That's not a relationship. That's not trust. And it's the same way with us. We're adult children of God, and he, in his love, gives us freedom to make choices toward him or away from him. But he doesn't leave us to make those decisions blindly. Wisdom is God's gift to us. Wisdom is, his kind of knowledge and his will given to us through Scripture, through counsel with other people, through prayer, and through experience. So I would say get wisdom, kind of be in all of those things, get it in all shapes or forms, because those will help you actually make decisions from one to the next. And you can say oh, maybe I shouldn't walk into that because that doesn't feel wise, because that would, what's an example? So an example is when my husband came back from Ghana, the biggest thing of wisdom that he learned after being in that period that I told you was super isolating for him. So when he came back, the priority number one, wisdom number one was before you figure out what you're going to do with your life from now on, be a part of spiritual community, because that's what your soul needs right now. So it's not necessarily this super clear what that looks like. Move into South LA, be a part of a team or something. It's not that clear, but it's wisdom from God that he can take to inform the decision that he's going to make in the next week. So that's what wisdom is. So the last thing I want to say is it's going to be okay. So that may sound a little patronizing, but there will be moments in your life, many moments in your life, when you have to make a decision where it just feels just anxiety-ridden, where it feels just scary, or it feels too pressuring, or it feels this super big riddle and you can't really figure out how all the parts work together. It's going to be okay. That's the reality. Just like Jerome told me, about Jared going to Africa. As you follow Jesus, God follows you. Even if you make a step of I guess that wasn't the right choice, God will still go with you and he'll be with you. If we take the lesson from the prodigal son, even if you completely leave God and betray him and offend him and sin and go about your wild fleshly ways, he will still be with you. He'll still run out to you. So don't view God as this father of you need to figure out if it's going to be right or wrong, otherwise, you're lost. God is going to be with you. I've been reminded of this in this season of my life. So like I told you, I'm going back to grad school. That's actually something I kind of prayed and discerned with God about 4.5 years ago. So 4.5 years ago, I was leaving my consulting job. It became a really toxic environment for me, in that my boss was a little bit crazy. I would like come home crying at the end of each day. It just wasn't a good work environment. So it was very clear that I was like, okay, on to the next thing, God, because God didn't necessarily want me to stay in that super toxic environment for much longer. And so at that time, I figured like, oh, like I think God might be calling me back to school at some point. And I like discerned that, and I met with like old professors, and I like prayed with friends, and I tried to figure out. I felt like, yeah, like it feels like God's in this school thing. But as I looked more into programs and what felt right for my career development, it was very clear that like all of the programs that I would have applied to would have been on the East Coast. And I was living in LA. And I was dating Jared at the time, and he had just started a 5-year PhD program in LA. And I was like, oh. Like, and we were at the point where we're like about to get engaged. It was like kind of that phase in our life. And I was like, oh, this is serious. Like, right? Like, on the one hand, I'm pretty sure I want to marry this guy. On the other hand, I really don't want to take this job. And God, it feels like God's kind of bringing me into this grad school thing. I was like, how's this going to work? Like, I don't want to do like 2-3 years of long distance. We had already done a year of long distance when he was in Ghana. And there was like, it just felt like I felt completely paralyzed. I remember like that day I actually like went to Jared's house and we kind of prayed together, but I was like in tears. And I actually had this, I'd never had a migraine before in my life. I mean, I don't know if it was actually a migraine. It was like the most throbbing headache I've ever had, because it just felt like there was this big question that I couldn't solve. And I'm a controller, and I'm a person that tries to strategize and hit it at all different angles. And it's like, I don't know how to hit this problem. So I went to sleep that night. I went home and I went to sleep. And I woke up the next morning and I had this vision. And this vision was of me, like 10 years in the future. And like, so I called it like just 10 years from now. So just 10 years from now came and just like squeezed my hand and just said like, it's gonna be okay. Take a deep breath. It's gonna be okay. And as I was kind of praying through that a little bit more, I felt like God was just kind of holding me. I felt his arms holding me. It's gonna be okay. I didn't know how it was gonna be okay. It eventually did. So I decided, after a lot of prayer, a lot of talking to different other married couples, and kind of feeling like, are we ready for marriage? Is it an okay thing to like make this decision given all these other factors? I decided to stay in Los Angeles, and the promise that God had for me was that there's something here for you. You're not just staying here because you're going to be the wife that's waiting for her husband to finish, his PhD. There's something here for you in your career. There's going to be a next step for you. And that's when he pretty much handed me my job at Harvest Home, the job I'm at right now. I didn't even apply for the job. There was a friend of a friend that gave it to me, and it was perfect. I had all these check boxes of what I wanted for the next job in my life, and it just bam, 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 just filled all of it. And I didn't even seek it out. And that was in that moment, that was God, saying yes, you trusted me that it was going to be okay, and I followed through, and I show you that it's going to be okay. And I'm thinking about that now, because now I'm actually going back to grad school, so it's the timing for that, and it feels like, you're amazing, God. I really couldn't have orchestrated my life this way if I had planned it for myself when I was 19, 20, 21 years old. But every step of the way, I just kind of stepped into okay, what do you have for me in this season, God? I prayed, I got wisdom from community, I read the scripture, I set time aside to try and figure it out. And every season, it has just felt like the right thing. And that's not to say that it's not difficult and it's not hard and there isn't struggles or things he's teaching you. But God is with you. God is your Father just as much as he is mine. And he's got you. This is his journey in as much as it is yours. And he's with you in it. He sees your uncertainty, your doubts, your fears. He sees your desires, your hopes, your dreams. And even better than that, he sees far, far ahead, and he sees how all those things are going to come into fruition. Living into your calling means just surrendering to Jesus, season by season. And as you do that, your God, the God who created you, who knows your desires and passions because he formed them and placed them in you, God who knows your unique giftings and talents, he will give you the career that is meant for you, and he will give you the calling that is meant for you. You ultimately, at the end of the day, are called a child of God. You're called to be his disciples in his kingdom. You're called to bring the love of God and the hope of Christ into the dark and dying places of this world. And some of you will do that in some 9-to-5 job, just in your workplace, having lunch with people every day, showing them God's generosity and kindness. Some of you will be missionaries maybe, and in some seemingly God-forsaken place day in and day out, loving on the poor. Others of you will maybe be in the entertainment industry and making music or films that are actually like changing people's paradigms and helping them understand themselves and their God better. Others of you will be prayer warriors and really working towards like healing and restoration and reconciliation as well. Whatever it is, it's all beautiful. It's all part of God's plan. It's all part of God's design. As long as you remember that your ultimate calling is to serve Jesus, and as long as you remember that your God, in calling you to do that, knows you, and he has you, and he holds you, you guys are going to be fine. It'll be okay. I'm going to invite the worship team up right now to play a song. And as they're singing, I want you to just take some time to yourself and think, what does God want to tell me in this moment? You're all in different places. You might be feeling different things. So just in this moment, just try and be attentive to what it is, what word God might have